I'm Marcia. I still remember that fateful day at the dentist's office like it was yesterday. One moment, I was sitting in the dental chair, expecting a simple filling or maybe a root canal at worst. The next, my dentist, Dr. Henry Clark, dropped his tools, stepped back, and uttered words that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to call 911 right now," he said. As he held up the X-ray, I stared at the dark shadow in a region I never thought a dental X-ray could capture. It was like a ticking time bomb in my head. My whole world started spinning, and I felt like my life was about to shatter into pieces. Let me take you back to the beginning. I'm a 28-year-old software engineer in Seattle, Washington. I've always been the kind of person who just powers through difficulties. I'm so focused on my work that I often ignore my body's warning signs. Headaches? I pop a painkiller and keep going. Doctor's appointments? I usually skip them. I tell myself I'm fine, even when deep down, I know something's off. I have an older brother named Lucas. He's 33 and works as a physical therapist. Our parents were always hard-working. My dad was a strict but loving man who instilled in us the value of hard work. My mom was gentle and caring, always looking out for our well-being. But when I was 20, my mom passed away from a heart attack. Since then, Lucas has been like a second parent to me, constantly nagging me to take better care of myself. It all started about 3 weeks before that fateful dentist appointment. One morning, I woke up with a dull ache in my right lower jaw. It was just a minor annoyance at first, coming and going throughout the day. I thought it was probably a cavity or my wisdom teeth acting up. I told myself I'd make an appointment soon, but with a big project at work, I kept pushing it off. My company had landed a major contract, and I was in charge of developing a new software application. It was a huge opportunity, and I was determined to prove myself. So, I worked long hours, fueled by coffee and energy drinks. I barely had time to eat proper meals, let alone take care of my jaw pain. During one of our weekly dinners at Lucas's place, he noticed something was wrong. We were having pizza when he suddenly put down his slice and stared at me. "You keep rubbing your jaw. What's going on?" he asked. I shrugged it off and said it was probably just a cavity, and I'd get it checked out eventually. But Lucas wasn't satisfied. He leaned forward, his eyes filled with concern, just like our mom used to look at us when we were sick. "Marcia, you need to see a dentist this week. It's not something to ignore," he said. I promised him I would, but I had no real intention of doing so. I was too wrapped up in my work. I couldn't afford to take time off for what I thought was a minor toothache. But the pain didn't stay minor. Over the next 2 weeks, it got worse. The dull ache turned into a constant throb that radiated up my face and into my temple. I started getting headaches that wouldn't go away, no matter how much water I drank or how many painkillers I took. Some mornings, I woke up feeling dizzy, as if the room was spinning. I blamed it on stress, lack of sleep, and too much time in front of the computer screen. The night before my dentist appointment, I hit rock bottom. I woke up at 2 a.m. with pain so intense that I thought my head was going to explode. My entire right side of the face was on fire. I stumbled to the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and watery, my skin pale and ashen. I was sweating even though the room was cold. I finally admitted to myself that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just a cavity or stress. I needed help. I grabbed my phone and opened the website of my dentist, Dr. Henry Clark. He'd been my dentist since I moved to Seattle 5 years ago. He was always kind, patient, and remembered details about my life from previous appointments. I found the earliest available slot, which was 9 a.m. the next morning, and booked it before I could change my mind. Then I crawled back into bed and stared at the ceiling until dawn. I couldn't sleep. The pain was unbearable, but I was also terrified. I kept thinking about my mom and how a routine check-up had turned into a life-changing event for her. The next morning, I got dressed slowly, my hands shaking as I buttoned my shirt. I skipped breakfast because my stomach was in knots. I drove to the dentist's office in silence, not even bothering to turn on the radio. The streets were quiet, and the world seemed to be holding its breath. When I arrived at the dental office, I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to calm my nerves. I looked at myself in the rear-view mirror and took a deep breath. I told myself it was just a normal dental appointment, and everything would be okay. Little did I know that in less than an hour, my life would change forever. The waiting room was typical of a dentist's office. Soft music played from hidden speakers, and there were magazines on the coffee table that no one ever read. A TV on the wall showed the morning news with the volume turned down. There were 2 other patients waiting, both engrossed in their phones. I signed in at the front desk and filled out the standard paperwork. I wrote down jaw pain and headaches as the reason for my visit and handed the clipboard back to the receptionist. She smiled and told me Dr. Clark would be with me shortly. I sat down in a padded chair and tried to calm my racing heart. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas, "Good luck at the dentist. Call me after and let me know what they say. Love you." I quickly replied and then stuffed my phone into my purse. I just wanted to get this over with. About 10 minutes later, a dental hygienist named Lily called my name. She had a warm smile that made me feel a little better. She led me down a hallway and into a small examination room. The room had a large chair in the center, reclined slightly, with a bright light above it. A tray of dental tools sat on a counter, all shiny and sterile. Lily asked me to sit down and lean back. She draped a paper bib across my chest and asked me to describe my symptoms. I told her about the jaw pain that had been getting worse for 3 weeks, the headaches that wouldn't go away, and the dizziness. I said I thought it was probably just stress from work. She nodded and typed everything into a computer. She said they'd start with some X-rays to get a better look at what was going on. She positioned a heavy lead apron over my chest and placed a small plastic device in my mouth. She told me to bite down and hold still. The machine made a clicking sound, and then she moved it to a different angle and repeated the process. After that, she brought over a larger machine that wrapped around my head for a panoramic X-ray. I sat alone in the examination room while she went to process the images. The minutes felt like hours. I stared at the ceiling tiles and counted them one by one. I listened to the muffled sounds of conversations in other rooms. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine and that I'd be out of there soon with just a prescription for antibiotics. When the door opened, it wasn't Lily who walked in. It was Dr. Clark. He usually greeted me with a smile and asked about my work or my brother. But today, his face was serious. He was holding the X-ray in his hand as if it was the weight of the world. He sat down on a rolling stool beside my chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. It wasn't just concern, it was something deeper. He spoke slowly and carefully. "Marcia, I need to ask you some questions. Have you been having headaches recently?" I told him I'd been having them almost every day for the past few weeks. He then asked if I'd been feeling dizzy. I said yes, assuming it was because of lack of sleep. He also asked if I'd noticed any changes in my vision. I thought for a moment and remembered a few times when my vision seemed a bit off, like looking through a foggy window. I told him, and his expression grew even more solemn. He stood up, removed his latex gloves, and set them on the counter. Then he turned to me and said, "Marcia, you need to stay calm. We need to call 911 right away." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe or think. I opened my mouth to ask what was happening, but no words came out. He held up the X-ray to the light and pointed to a dark shadow above my teeth. "This shadow shouldn't be here. I'm not a neurologist, but I know this needs immediate attention. I can't let you leave this office without getting you to a hospital," he said. I stared at the shadow on the X-ray, and panic set in. This wasn't a cavity or a wisdom tooth problem. It was something in my head, something that could kill me. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to grip the armrests of the dental chair to steady myself. Dr. Clark must have seen the panic in my eyes. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Marcia, I know this is terrifying, but try to breathe. We don't know what this is yet, but we caught it, and that's the important thing. We need to get you to a specialist." I nodded, but my mind was stuck on one thought. This is how it started with Mom. A routine appointment, an unexpected finding, and a life-changing diagnosis. Dr. Clark stepped out of the room to talk to the receptionist. I could hear his urgent voice through the door. He was telling her to call 911, clear his schedule for the morning, and bring me some water because I looked like I was about to pass out. A moment later, the receptionist came in with a small paper cup of cold water. She handed it to me with a sympathetic smile and said everything would be okay. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was falling apart. I asked Dr. Clark if I could call Lucas before the ambulance arrived. He handed me his office phone without hesitation. My own phone was buried in my purse, and my hands were too shaky to dig for it. I dialed Lucas's number from memory. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and unaware of what was happening. "Hey, that was fast. Are you done already? What did they say?" he asked. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. I pressed my hand over my mouth and squeezed my eyes shut. Lucas's voice changed instantly. "Marcia, what's wrong? Talk to me. What's happening?" he demanded. I managed to stutter out a few broken sentences. I told him I was still at the dentist, that something was wrong, and that they were calling an ambulance. He didn't ask for more details. He just said, "I'm coming right now. Don't move. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead, and I handed the phone back to Dr. Clark. He told me the ambulance was on its way and that he'd stay with me until it arrived. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. I sat in the dental chair, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I'd been putting off. Trips I wanted to take, friends I'd neglected to call, and conversations I'd avoided. I also thought about Lucas and how he'd been telling me to take care of myself for years. And I thought about my mom and the promise I'd made at her funeral to live my life to the fullest. I'd broken that promise by burying myself in work and ignoring my health. The sound of sirens in the distance pulled me out of my thoughts. They grew louder and louder until they stopped outside the building. A moment later, 2 paramedics walked in with a stretcher. They were calm and professional, asking me questions about my symptoms as they checked my vitals. They helped me onto the stretcher and strapped me in. As they wheeled me out of the dental office, the morning sun was warm on my face. I closed my eyes for a moment and let myself feel it. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew I wouldn't face it alone. Just as they were loading me into the ambulance, I heard a car screech into the parking lot. A door slammed, and then I heard footsteps running towards me. I turned my head and saw Lucas sprinting across the pavement, his face pale with fear. He reached the ambulance just as the paramedics were about to close the doors. He grabbed my hand and said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The ambulance ride felt like it lasted forever. Lucas sat beside me, holding my hand so tightly that I could feel his pulse. He didn't say much, his presence was enough. One of the paramedics asked me questions about my medical history, but I could barely focus on his words. My mind kept going back to that shadow on the X-ray. When we arrived at Seattle General Hospital, everything moved quickly. The paramedics wheeled me through the emergency room doors and into a busy hallway filled with nurses and doctors. Someone was calling out instructions, and another person was attaching wires to my chest to monitor my heart. A nurse inserted an IV into my arm and said they were going to run some tests. Lucas had to wait outside while they took me for scans. He kissed my forehead and told me he'd be there when I came back. I watched his face disappear as the doors closed behind me, and I felt more alone than I ever had. They started with a CT scan. I lay still on a narrow table while the machine hummed and clicked around me. The technician told me when to hold my breath and when to relax. After that, I had an MRI. The machine was louder than I expected, a rhythmic banging that echoed in my skull. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine I was somewhere else, like a peaceful beach. When the tests were finished, they brought me back to a small room in the emergency department. Lucas was already there, sitting in a plastic chair with his coat still on. He jumped up when he saw me and rushed to my side. He asked if I was okay, if it hurt, and if they'd told me anything yet. I shook my head. We were still waiting. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. Lucas tried to distract me by talking about random things, like his patients at work and a new restaurant he wanted to try. I appreciated the effort, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I just stared at the door, waiting for someone to come in and tell me my fate. Finally, there was a knock on the door. A woman in a white coat stepped inside. She introduced herself as Dr. Olivia Thompson, a neurosurgeon. She was tall with short black hair and a calm presence that put me at ease. She pulled a rolling stool closer to my bed and sat down so we were at eye level. "Marcia, I've reviewed your scans, and I want to go over what we found," she said. She turned a computer monitor towards me and pulled up an image of my brain. It looked strange and unfamiliar, all gray and white shapes. But then she pointed to a small dark circle near the base of my skull. She explained that it was an aneurysm, a weak spot in one of the blood vessels in my brain that had started to bulge like a small balloon. It had probably been growing slowly for months or even years. The headaches, dizziness, and jaw pain were all symptoms of the pressure building inside my skull. She looked at me seriously and said, "Marcia, this aneurysm is in a dangerous location. If it ruptures, you could have a massive stroke, and the survival rate is very low. We're talking about minutes, not hours." I felt Lucas's grip tighten on my hand, and I heard his breath catch in his throat. But then she continued, "The good news is that we found it before it ruptured. There's a procedure we can do to fix it called endovascular coiling. A surgeon will thread a tiny tube through your blood vessels and place small metal coils inside the aneurysm to seal it off. It's delicate and risky, but it could save your life." I had a million questions, but only one came out of my mouth. What would have happened if I hadn't gone to the dentist this morning? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Based on the size and location of this aneurysm, I estimate you had less than a week before it ruptured on its own. If your dentist hadn't caught this on the X-ray, you probably wouldn't be here right now," she said. Tears streamed down my face, and Lucas was crying too. They scheduled the surgery for the next morning. That night, I lay awake in the hospital bed, thinking about all the things I still wanted to do with my life. Lucas refused to leave, sleeping in the chair beside me, even when the nurses offered him a cot. The next morning, they came to take me to the operating room. Lucas walked beside the stretcher until we reached the doors he couldn't pass through. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. "I love you. I'll be here when you wake up," he said. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia pulled me under was the bright light of the operating room ceiling. And the last thing I thought was a prayer, "Please let me wake up." When I woke up, the first thing I felt was pain. It felt like a hammer was pounding inside my head. My eyes were heavy, and it took all my strength to open them. The room was bright and blurry, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I heard Lucas's voice. He was standing beside my bed, holding my hand just like he promised. When he saw my eyes open, his face crumpled with relief. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against mine. "You're okay. The surgery worked. You're going to live," he whispered. I spent the next 3 days in the intensive care unit. The doctors monitored me constantly, checking my vitals and asking me questions to make sure my brain was functioning properly.